So Marina described some of the changes in jobs and the employment relation that have been happening recently, and I want to provide some context by talking about the changing shape of enterprise and how the kinds of companies we have today look very different from the 20th century norm that we're used to. So underlying these are some of the technological changes that Marina talked about. My last book had the extremely puzzling title, The Vanishing American Corporation. The puzzling thing is, why the hell are American corporations vanishing? Public corporations are the dominant form of enterprise since the turn of the 20th century in the US. But it turns out that the number of public corporations we have today is about half what it was 25 years ago, and they don't seem to be coming back. And that seems a little bit mysterious. So, how did that happen? You might think it's just industry consolidation, that all of the big companies bought each other up, but that's not really the case. I've dug into it pretty deeply, and it's not just industry consolidation. One way to get at that is to think of what were the Dow Jones companies at the end of the Reagan administration. So in 1988, these were the pillars of the 20th century American economy. Fast forward 30 years later to where we are now, and most of them are long gone from the index, and many of them are just gone forever. Nobody under 40 remembers American Can or Bethlehem Steel or Eastman Kodak or Sears or Westinghouse. They're just basically memories from the past. If you're a big Schumpeter fan, you might say, hooray, it's creative destruction and the dinosaurs are going away and they're going to be replaced by the mammals. But that's not really the case either. In fact, if you look at the IPO market, it seems to have a little life in it today, but the broad trends are pretty negative. The IPO market has never really recovered, not just from what it was in the 1990s, but even what it was in the 80s. It seems like being a public corporation is increasingly an obsolete format for doing business. That seems very surprising. Well, why do we have public corporations in the first place? If you asked an economist like Ronald Coase, they would say that it has to do with transaction costs. Coase claimed the reason why we had firms instead of just using markets is that markets are expensive. Free markets have a cost to using them. You have to shop around for suppliers and haggle with them and pay lawyers and monitor the completion of contracts and things like that. There's a cost to using markets, a transaction cost. And as he said here, his most famous article, the most obvious cost of organizing production through the price mechanism is that of discovering what the relevant prices are. That's why we ended up with something like the Ford Motor Company's Rouge plant, where they made steel and glass on site and they owned their distribution channels, they owned their supply channels all the way back into the dirt. They were a highly vertically integrated enterprise. But imagine a Coasean thought experiment. What if everybody carried with them a tiny supercomputer communicator that allowed them to look up the prices for everything in the world all day, every day, and they could create contracts with for inputs with random strangers and track performance in real time? So imagine this bizarre Black Mirror thought experiment where transaction costs go to zero. What would happen? What would happen is Nikeification. You would get the pervasive outsourcing of the production of goods and services. I say Nikeification because famously Nike doesn't make the sneakers or soccer balls or skis with their name on it. They've always contracted out from the get-go, which made Philip Knight very rich. I'm here to tell you that every industry in America has become Nikeified. There's almost nothing you can buy in the US that's made by the OEM, the company whose name is on the label. Vizio became the best selling television brand. Mobile phones are made by Foxconn and not Apple. Pet food is made in Canada by a vendor. Tomato sauce, heparin, CIA assassinations, you name it. And it's actually done by contractors rather than the company with their name on the label. That's easy to visualize for suppliers, like making a handset for a phone or a flat screen television. It's trickier with labor. Labor seems special and different from that. But of course, as you all know, there is an Uber for everything now. It's become a cliche, of course, but I want to point out something important about Uberization. The importance of Uber is not the Uber corporation itself, which, who knows what their fate may be in the future. The important thing about Uberization is it's the creation of spot labor markets enabled by smartphones in which buyers and sellers can contract for the performance of specific tasks. That is a really fundamental shift in the nature of the labor market. That's not something we've seen before. We've seen spot labor markets before. If you ever drive by a Home Depot early in the morning, you see spot labor markets going on every single day. What's different, though, is what technology enables. Uberization turns the world into a spot labor market. Anyone can hire onto a job if they happen to have their phone with them. So think how this is changing the nature of medicine. It's not just low skilled jobs or transient jobs, even emergency room physician or health calls or reading x rays. All of those things have been Uberized. So it's not just the level of skill, it's probably the asset specificity. While that works for suppliers and labor, what about distribution? Here, the answer is pretty straightforward. The answer is Amazon. Amazon has created the universal distribution channel for goods and many services. If you can connect to Fulfillment by Amazon, you never need to touch the products with your brand name on them. Farhad Manjoo wrote a brilliant column saying we're going to get better products for ludicrously low prices as big brands are outcompeted by disruptors. Vizio will put Sony out of business, arguably, because they're cheap. So summarizing all of this, a digital transformation drastically lowered the transaction costs for accessing core factor markets. That's the underlying theory here is tech lowers transaction costs and makes it cheaper to use markets. Markets like the financial markets, Nikification for supplies, Amazon for distribution, Uberization for labor markets. And one of the things that this does is that it leaves the components to create an enterprise lying like Legos on the floor waiting to be assembled. If you've got a credit card and a web connection, you can snap together an enterprise. And that's how we end up with something like Instant Pot. And I'm ready to say that I believe Instant Pot is probably the greatest advance in human civilization in the 21st century. It is just a fantastic product that everyone should own if they don't have one yet. The thing is that they were distributing, thank you for that. They sell 300,000 of these things on Prime Day alone, and the company had 50 employees in Ottawa. It had no assets and almost no employees, and the entire supply and distribution channel are outsourced. And yet it's a sort of world-beating company. So that's kind of a puzzler. What does this mean for the shape of employment? If enterprises look different, how do we think about the nature of employment? Well, if manufacturers have outsourced heroically, as I claim, this has left us with a situation where the biggest employers in the US are overwhelmingly in retail. And if you scan down to the last column, this is the median annual compensation for the people working at Walmart, Amazon, UPS, Home Depot, and so on. For comparison purposes, it costs a company about $21,000 a year to cover the head of household and their family with health insurance. So the cost to cover a family with health insurance is pretty similar to the cost of employing someone for a year at Walmart, Home Depot, Kroger, Target, and so on. This strikes me as a pretty unsustainable situation for a variety of reasons. We're in this weird world for employment. Meanwhile, General Motors has about as many employees today as it did in 1925. So the world of work is looking really, really different. And I'm going to say that it's on the verge or in the midst of a vast transformation that's likely to be a disaster for labor if we don't seize the reins the way that Marina was describing. After California passed Proposition 22, certifying that Uber and DoorDash and Lyft drivers were contractors and not employees, within weeks, grocery stores across California fired their delivery drivers and switched to DoorDash and other vendors. So this is the kind of thing we're likely to see. Who knows what'll become of Prop 22, but the pressures are in favor of something that looks like that. So how do we encourage enterprises that provide good jobs? That's, I think, a lot of what the Equitable Enterprise Initiative is all about. Well, you may have noticed that everyone in the world has published a book about monopoly in the last couple of years, including Josh Hawley and Amy Klobuchar. Luckily, you don't need to spend a month reading them. You can read these two sentences and get basically the punchline of all of those books. Concentration of corporate power are now the norm in the United States. A 2018 study found that concentration has increased in three-quarters of domestic industries in recent decades, giving companies greater power to raise prices, squeeze suppliers, and suppress wages, and use their power to dominate policy. So that's basically the punchline of all of these books. How did we deal with this in the 20th century? In the 20th century, we regulated product markets, supply markets, capital markets, labor markets. That was the way that we dealt with corporate power. But this becomes really complicated today. There's a problem. Almost exactly 10 years ago, Marc Andreessen published a piece in an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal called Why Software is Eating the World. And for dessert, it is dining on our understanding of the economy. The basic categories that we use to understand the economy are essentially falling apart because of this digital transformation. What is a firm? What is an employee? What is an industry? What is big? What is nationality? These things that we think we have a grip on really don't fit very well with the world that's emerging right now. So, what is a firm? One definition is private owners of capital goods employ labor and direct their activities. How does that apply to something like Instant Pot? They don't own the capital goods and they don't have very many employees. Do they still count as a firm by this definition if mostly they're organizing a set of contracts out there? Bit of a puzzler. What is an employee? I cannot recommend enough this piece that was in The Verge in the last couple of weeks called Revolt of the Delivery Drivers. And it's describing what they claim is about 65,000 delivery drivers in New York. Turns out, if you want to be a delivery rider in New York, you need to buy a $2,000 electric bike because they're the only ones that are powerful enough to get you there in time to get additional jobs. And thieves love $2,000 electric bikes. That's kind of crazy. After Proposition 22, is the rest of the world going to start to look like sort of this world? Really, highly recommend this piece if you get a chance to read it. What is an industry? All of these companies fairly recently went public, and according to their prospectus, they are in SIC code 7372, prepackaged software. I think if you look at this list of companies, you will realize they're in no sense competitors. To call them in the same industry starts to be kind of completely puzzling. They are all in the stare at a screen and type on a keyboard industry. But where they're competing looks really different from that. So our understanding of what counts as an industry is starting to fall apart. Well, what is big? I think most people would say that Zoom is a giant corporation. It single-handedly enabled work from home for white-collar workers and students during the pandemic, had 500 million downloads in 2020. They have 300 million daily users. I don't go a day without using Zoom. Have a market cap of about $80 billion, but they only have 4,422 employees globally in the world. That's about 1% of the number of employees at Home Depot. Hardly anybody works at Zoom, and they rent server space from Amazon and Oracle. So are they a giant corporation? Are they a minuscule corporation? How do we even think about something like size? That's a bit of a puzzle. And the last one is, what is geography? What counts as nationality today? Coinbase has one of the greatest IPO prospectuses you've ever seen. Highly recommended because it is kind of like a Black Mirror episode. What industry is it in? According to their IPO prospectus, business services, not elsewhere classified. Just like rural influencer or rural East commerce, the fact that you're trading Dogecoin, which is a meme-based sarcastic cryptocurrency, we don't really have good categories for understanding something like that. Where does Coinbase live? They don't list an address. They say in a footnote, we are a remote-first company. We do not maintain a headquarters. Physically absent corporation. Well, how do we think about these? We're living in a really different world now. And that kind of brings us to the question for the equitable enterprise entity, which is how do we use the tools we have now to create equitable enterprises that are more democratic, more humane, and responsive to their communities? And that's why I'm really excited to be part of this project. Thank you.